and welcome to another edition of Ask the Economist. Our question today comes from Danny, and it is, are there any examples of green energy initiatives that have actually reduced the cost to consumers or taxpayers that have been effective without government subsidies? And the short answer is yes, but not the ones you think. Energy policy is a huge mess. It's possible for governments to bring in subsidized energy, certainly reducing the cost to consumers if they stick it to taxpayers. It's even possible to bring in subsidized forms of energy, alternate or otherwise, that lower costs because the subsidy to the other thing was even worse. There is so much room to improve energy policy, not just on renewables, but also on conventional power. But the cost to consumers is not really the issue because there is so much jiggery-pokery and manipulation in these markets. The question is, what is the cost to society? Because if people are getting a deal on their power, but it's imposing enormous costs on the economy, it's not just other people who wind up worse off, it's them. The economy as a whole does less well, and even though their power bill looks attractive, they are getting a poke in the eye when you count everything. So, having said all that, where's the example of a green energy initiative that really did lower costs to consumers? Well, it's right in the tank of your car. Yes, folks, I'm talking about gasoline. Because at the turn of the last century, around 1900, there was a terrible environmental problem to do with the most common energy source. The cost to consumers were high, the pollution cost was high, and they were bumping up against potentially the economy to continue to supply this energy. I'm talking, of course, about horses. The great American and European cities of 1900 were primarily horse-powered for their transport. And the thing about horses is that you got to put a whole lot of hay in one end, you get a whole lot of horse waste out the other end, and horses themselves do things like die. And then when a horse dies, you got a dead horse. That's not a joke. New York City had to deal with tens of thousands of dead horses every year by 1900. It had to deal with thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of gallons of horse urine and tons of horse manure. The city was starting to choke in animal filth, and there was no obvious way to get rid of it. What's more, the amount of hay these things were gobbling down was causing widespread deforestation. There was less forest cover in the United States in 1900 than there was in 2000. And one of the major reasons why is so much of the land, particularly in the Northeast, had to be turned over for production to keep these hay burners running. And then, not governments, no sir, entrepreneurs, tinkerers, cranks started experimenting with automobiles. They didn't know at first that they should have gasoline engines. Gasoline engines didn't work all that well in those days. The speed record for automobiles at one point was held by the Stanley Steamer. And you think, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard of, a steam engine in a car? But, of course, to people who were used to steam engines in textile mills, steam engines on trains, steam was where you got your mechanical power. So, of course, if you needed mechanical power in a small movable object, you put a small steam engine in it. There were also people working on electric cars. But in that struggle, as petroleum exploration, production, and refining improved, this was the fuel that saved us from choking on horse manure and horse urine and dead horses and using up all our cropland to grow hay. There was a terrible environmental problem, multifaceted environmental problem, a crisis crying out for government not to do anything. And in those days, government didn't do it. Entrepreneurship did it. Now, a lot of people feel today that gasoline engines have become a problem. It's badly overstated. Most of you presumably know about my documentary on The Environment, A True Story, this question of whether carbon dioxide is really going to make the planet uninhabitable, and I say no, and you'll find out more about it when the documentary is produced. But the fact of the matter is that if we are running out of oil, if we can no longer afford internal combustion engines, governments wasting money on energy that doesn't work, redistributing wealth, making all the characteristic blunders that governments make, and adding that onto technology that has become faddish but is not effective will make the problem worse. But if these other forms of energy really do work, governments get out of the way and let the market do it. Just set rules, not just about force and fraud, but if you need to, about what emissions are permitted, and let human ingenuity do it. Let capital and ingenuity be drawn to opportunity, to find ways to produce a resource at lower cost so that consumers can afford it and it outcompetes the others, and we could have another revolution comparable to that wonderful green energy that came in 1900, the internal combustion engine powered by refined petroleum. If you have a question for Ask the Economist, send it to the address on the screen and we will be happy to answer it.